for protecting his woman? What do you think?
Well, it's a catch-22. You know, unfortunately, that's how I see it. It's a catch-22 because, you know, I understand about the threat part, you know, and that's why they charge him with second-degree murder.
Well, they charged him with manslaughter.
Manslaughter,
Yeah.
right? Because there was no intent.
Right.
The issue is when you eliminate the threat. Maybe your Marine training says eliminate the threat means kill them.
Okay.
Maybe that's something that you were taught in the Marines. Eliminate the threat. That means kill them, right? But when you look at all the video, because I went online, you know, people putting all the different versions of the video online. So, you know, the case is being tried in the media. It's not a white and black thing. You know what I mean? This is a mental illness thing. For me, the issue is it wasn't what you did, it's how long you held him. You know what I mean? Because my reality is this. You know, if you're in a physical altercation with somebody in the street, right? You're having a fist fight. And you get the lucky punch off. And you knock them out. They're laying on the floor, they're unconscious. Do you proceed to stomp them in their head now because they're knocked out unconscious, or do you leave them alone?
Well, if you decide to stomp them in the head, right? Well, then yes, this person no longer poses a threat to you, right? But now, let's say you get into a fight in the street, right? And you get him in a chokehold, right? And he's down on the ground trying to get up. Are you going to let that chokehold go?
Well, the moment the body goes limp, you should let him go.
The body
and in the video, if you look at all the video, there's a point where the body went limp. He didn't let him go.
Right.
He held him until the police came. It was the police that made him let the man go. And at that point, he was already deceased.
Right.
That's why he's charged, because the body was limp.
Right.
He was limp.
Right.
He was no longer threatened. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't doing anything. Why are you holding him in a chokehold?
Right. Right. So, yeah,
that's my issue.
Well, and you make some valid points, right? Once the person is no longer resisting you, right, and the person is no longer a threat to you, there's no longer a need to restrain this person. And if that is the case, right, what about the other people that were restraining him? Why aren't they charged as well?
Well, they are looking for those people as well, because they left the scene and nobody got their information.
Right.
Now, this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I'll tell you why. 2 years ago, my cousin Snudge died on the train tracks up in Harlem.
Wow, sorry to hear that.
All right. And he had mental illness. He had schizophrenia. And it was the winter time, and he was in a shelter for mental illness up there that they have up there in Harlem there. And this was during the COVID stuff was going on. And they were coming and bringing them their prescribed medication. A nurse would come and give them their medication. They would take their medication and they were fine.
Right.
Because of COVID, they stopped doing it that way. It was dropping the medicine off and kind of leave it up to the patients to take the medication. So you know what's going to happen with that.
Right.
They're not going to take the medication. Long story short, Snudge woke up and one of his schizophrenic breakdowns. Went to the subway naked.
Wow.
Ranting and raving. And a good Samaritan decides that he's going to step in and say something. You know? So he got into a fight with my cousin Snudge and hit him and knocked him on the train tracks.
Right.
He rolled over and hit the third rail.
Ooh.
Got electrocuted and died.
Right.
You know what? They didn't arrest this man, right? But again, everybody got their videos. It was all over Facebook. It was all over everybody, all over the place, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's somebody who, came from the shelter upstairs for the mentally ill, right? You could have contacted the police. Guess what? The token booth clerk watched him come in naked. You know what I mean? There was a police officer down the other end, but this man decided, oh, if this mofo come near me, I'm gonna knock his ass out.
Right.
Snudge walked by him in his schizophrenic state of mind. He punches him in the face and knocks him on the track. Snudge gets electrocuted.
Right.
You know what I mean? He on his medication. He just as lucid as you and I.
Right.
You know what I mean? So when it comes to mental illness in them subways and what these so-called good Samaritans do, hey, look, you got to be held accountable for your ways and actions, man. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes, you know what? They're only a threat to themselves. In most cases, the mentally ill is only a threat to themselves, because all these people that they're saying right now on TV about these mass shooters and all this other stuff, right? They talking about them, right? They say, oh, they're mentally ill. Those people aren't mentally ill. Those people have a, ideology that they're following. You know what I'm saying?
Well, some of them have been diagnosed, like the young lady in, I believe it was Tennessee. She was actually under a doctor's care. She never should have been able to purchase weapons.
Well, that was one of the first things that the Trump administration changed when they came into the office, to allow people that were mentally ill to still have the right to their Second Amendment right.
Which is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, right?
But the thing is, those people aren't battling with schizophrenia. Most of the homeless people that's mentally ill in New York City and around the country are schizophrenic. Well, and that's the issue. You know what I mean? Now, this Neely fella, I don't know exactly what his diagnosis was, but when you're homeless and hungry, through the winter, that's tough. That's tough, because you know what? I went to meet Rudd one day in Manhattan, and one of the things that he does, he has a contract with Citibank and Chase Bank, a couple other banks, where they call him when the homeless are in their ATM vegetables. So he has to drive over there and either get them to leave the vegetable, the ATM lobby, or call the police, and have the police get them. In most cases, the police don't want to be bothered. Right. The police take their time and come in, but he has to talk them out of the lobby, and sometimes they need medical assistance. So you got to call the ambulance, and they have to take them to a hospital. You know what I mean? So you have to have a spiritual ear to listen sometimes, right? And don't be so gung-ho, because it's easy to eliminate the threat and it be the final option. You know what I mean? It can be a lethal option. It's easy to do that. You know what I mean? Because guess what? We can do that to every mentally ill homeless person that we encounter walking down the street. We can see the people, they laying in a cardboard box while we walk by. We don't like the fact that he urinates on the sidewalk. He goes in the garbage and he sleeps in front of my building. I want to get rid of him. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna choke him out, or I'm gonna shoot him, or I'm gonna stab him, because I got to get rid of him because he's an eyesore. And then I'm gonna say he's a threat to me. You know what I mean? But these are the same people who will lose their mind if you threw a dog on a train track, right? Or if you kick the dog, right? You know what I'm saying? If you kick the cat, You know what I mean? These are the same people that would go lose their mind over that. But what's so different between the dog or the cat or the human or even the raccoons? You know, I hear people that complain about the raccoons. I hear people that even they talk about how the rats are a nuisance in New York and with the garbage, right? And just a few months ago, they had went out and the city had put out poison to kill the rats, right? It took one dog to get sick because he ingested some of this poison. The whole program went out the window.
Right.
Because the life of one dog was more important than getting rid of that nuisance. So why can't we do that? Take that same approach to the mentally ill, homeless people in New York City
and
around the country?
Okay, so homelessness and mental illness is a major crisis in this country. And yes, we should have compassion for those. I mean, just being on the street has a toll, takes a mental toll on you. You know, I get it. However, in New York and across the country, when something happens, people immediately pull out their phones and start filming, right? I guess you want to be a witness. Somebody has to take action, right? Because, you know, if somebody has a psychotic break, they don't care that you're filming them. The guy in upstate New York, in Buffalo, who killed 10 people in the supermarket, filmed it himself.
Right. And guess what?
He's not the only one.
But he wasn't mentally ill. He was following an ideology that he was recruited through social network to become that way.
And I agree with you.
He was perfectly sane.
And I agree with you.
So he should be held accountable for what he did as an individual.
Absolutely.
And we can't blame what he did on mental illness.
No, I'm not talking about mental illness. No, not mental illness. I'm talking about the fact that it was videotaped. He videotaped it himself.
Yes.
So they don't care about you pulling out your phones.
No.
Right? You know, if you're on that train, let's change the scenario. You're on that train and somebody pulls out a knife and starts stabbing people. Oh, you can sit there and go like this. You can film it until they get to you.
Well, guess what? That's a whole nother dynamic, because now if I'm sitting on the train and I'm in arm's reach of a person that's stabbing or an arm's reach of a shooter, I'm going to attack.
You have to.
I'm going to
fight
attack. Fight or flight. I'm going to attack.
Right.
I'm going to neutralize that threat. I'm going to stop that man, that woman, that child, you know, or even that dog. That people got on the train with their dog and the dog went attack. We gonna neutralize the threat.
Right.
Not necessarily eliminate the threat, but we're gonna neutralize the threat. You know what I mean? So that's something that's totally different. You know what I mean? Because at some point, you got to do more than just videotaping.
And that's my point, right? Videotaping, you know, it has its place. But when there is something, a threat, a perceived threat, right? It takes someone to take action, right? Everybody can't be robotic and say, oh, let me pull up my phone and start filming this. Somebody has to say, listen, our lives are at stake, right? Our safety is threatened. So do you prosecute the one who says, I'm going to take action? So again, what it comes down to is any of us could be in a situation where, you know, we're sitting in a restaurant having a meal and somebody comes running inside, right? And they're reaching for a gun. Pennsylvania, so many people, it's a state that is gun friendly. So many people carry firearms, right? What do you think the reaction is going to be? People see this, don't really understand what happened outside, just see somebody running in and look like they're reaching for something. That hand comes out, there may be nothing in it, but they may be shot.
You're right. You're right.
You know, some people are going to start filming, right? You might be filming your own execution.
You're right. Right.
So, this is a complex issue, and it goes beyond what happened on that subway. This goes across this country, across this planet, because there are mentally ill people everywhere. And how do we react to them? And, I remember Eleanor Bumpers, right?
Yeah. I remember Eleanor Bumpers.
That was back in the 80s.
Yeah,
right?
I remember I asked you about that a few weeks ago.
You did.
Yeah.
And that woman, mental illness, right? She hadn't paid her rent, right? Her behavior was erratic, barricaded herself in the apartment because she was going to be evicted, right? Maybe at this point, she's in a psychotic break and doesn't understand why they're trying to gain entry. She just knows that people are trying to get into her apartment. Well, she arms herself with a knife. Now, outside the apartment, what she doesn't realize is that the police out there, and they called in emergency services unit. Okay. During that time, there really wasn't a protocol on how to respond to a person with mental illness.
Why do you say that?
Because there wasn't a protocol. Right? And that's why.
But the Health and Hospital Services is New York City, yes?
Health and Hospital Corporation?
Yes.
Yes, it's New York City.
Right. And they handle mental illness, correct?
Okay, so here's the thing. I used to work for Health and Hospitals Corporation when I worked for EMS, right? So that was 1989 when I started. In 1985, when this happened with Eleanor Bumpers, there wasn't a protocol in place for police officers. No protocol, no specific training on how to deal with somebody with mental illness. That's why the sergeant who fired the fatal shots was allowed to stay on the job and was not prosecuted. So when they finally gained entry to the apartment, they had long poles to keep her at bay. They had shields. Well, when they got in there, she's holding a knife. Well, the sergeant fired a shot, and it basically blew her arm off. She no longer was holding the knife. Then he fired a second shot into her chest, killing her. So when, of course, questions were asked, well, Sergeant, why did you use lethal force? What is the protocol for dealing with a mentally ill person or patient or whatever? He said there is no protocol. There was nothing written in the New York City Police Department's, SOP or patrol guide that told you specifically what to do when you encounter a person with mental illness, right? So after that time, they started coming out with different protocols on what to do, because you can't just go away and you can't just go blow away every homeless person or every mentally ill person you encounter.
Well, let me ask you, how did you deal with it when you became a police officer? Well, how did you deal with mental illness?
By the time I got hired as a police officer, there were a number of protocols in place, right, in order to deal with mentally ill people. Now, of course, when you talk about mentally ill people, there are people who are mentally ill but pose no threat to anyone. Then you have people who are mentally ill who have violent tendencies, right? Okay. For those folks that pose no threat, a lot of times you can kind of just talk them out of an area. Like, look, man, I understand that, you need a place to sleep, but just not here, right? And over
that's what Rudd does.
Right. And over time, you know what? You develop a rapport with them. They know you and you know them, right? And like, look, man, I'm never going to disrespect you. Just don't disrespect me. The time I'm working, just go someplace else, right? Sometimes, you see them, you buy them a cup of coffee, something to eat.
That's
you
right.
You never have a problem with them anymore, right? They understand. Now, if you have somebody who's violent, right, then, all bets are off, right? You're going to respond to their level of aggression with a level equal to or higher, right? Because you just can't stand there and try to negotiate with somebody who's choking the hell out of somebody. It
Right.
don't work that way.
Well, here's another thing that annoys me, that pisses me off this whole situation. During COVID, right? They had a whole program where they were removing the homeless from the subways
Mm-hmm.
and the buses every day. They were removing them every day because they were shutting the system down, I guess. I don't know what they were doing, but they during COVID, they were removing the homeless and mentally ill from the subways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why they can't do that now? Why did they stop doing that?
Okay.
Why there's nothing in place that, you had mental service health personnel going out into the subways. You had police going out in the subways, removing these people, and they were putting them on buses and taking them to somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where they were taking them, but they were taking them off the trains and out of public transportation to keep themselves safe from other people and themselves. Why we can't do that today?
There's one answer to that: money. We're not devoting the resources to mental health. We're just not, right? It's not a priority, right? And you mentioned removing people. Okay. In the late 80s and early 90s, New York City had homeless people everywhere. Every subway station, every heated grate on the sidewalk, every bus station, airports, everywhere. In 1993, I want to say, Giuliani was elected mayor of New York City. And he decided he was going to clean up places like Times Square, which was a known location for many homeless people and those with mental illness. I've always asked, what happened to all those homeless people? Where did they go? We did not have enough shelter space for them, right? In fact, we were closing some of the shelters. So what happened to hundreds of thousands of homeless people? Where did they go? I've never been able to, understand where were these people taken. And there was an episode on, I think it was Law and Order, where a homeless person was found barely alive, but an organ missing, right? I think it was a kidney. I remember about maybe 20 years or so ago, they found out that organs were being harvested. I think it was some Israelis involved in harvesting organs and selling them. Where are they getting all these organs from? So it makes me wonder, right? I mean, it comes down to simple, just resources. Nobody wants to devote the resources to deal with homelessness. Just like we don't devote proper resources to deal with food insecurity, right? Healthcare, we don't give a damn. And healthcare falls under, your mentals fall under the healthcare.
They got the food stamp program for hungry folks. They got that. They got
well, think about this.
They got that insurance exchange for if you got no insurance, and it's some options out there.
Well, here's the thing. You talked about food stamps, right? If you look at the guidelines for being eligible for food stamps and assistance, those guidelines really haven't changed much since the 1950s and 60s. So here you are in the 21st century using guidelines from a century ago. So you're telling people, okay, if you make this amount of money, you're not eligible for this program. But these guidelines are from 60 years ago. They haven't updated them. Why? Because it's a way of forcing people off the system or denying them access to the system.
Well, I guess it's taking away the crutch.
Well, you know what?
Well, all right. Never mind the food stamp part.
Mm-hmm.
You might be right about that. You're probably right about that. But you got the food pantries out there.
You do.
right? I think the healthcare is more important. You can always find something to eat.
Hopefully, yeah.
Well, sustenance living is, I mean, you can go anywhere and find food. You can live off the land. I mean, come on, look around us.
You can live off the land, yes, if you're a planter, right? You can do that. This time of year, things are growing. You can go to a farmer's market or whatever, get fresh fruit, grow your own. Sure, you can. Wintertime, different story, right? But if you look at, and this is getting a little off topic, but if you look at the U.S. budget, right, what the government prioritizes, the number one thing that we spend money on is defense. Number one, without question, right? We spend, for every dollar we spend to heal people and get them healthy, we probably spend 10,000 for killing people and eliminating populations, right?
Well, some of that money got to be redirected to mental health, so we don't have these nearly situations.
But see, that's the problem. They won't do it, right?
That's why we need term limits.
You're absolutely right. We need to revamp this entire system because we talked about the fact that 199 active shooter events, more events than we've had days in a year, and yet, what has Congress done to address this scourge of gun violence? Not a damn thing. And they're not going to do a damn thing, right? In fact, in some states, they have made access to gun ownership easier. Down in Florida, Texas, and other places, they made it easier to get their hands on a gun. You see children being slaughtered in their classrooms. And yet, you want to make it easier to buy a gun? So there are so many things that our government needs to address. And we are the government. So we need to make the government prioritize these issues. But what happens is it falls on deaf ears. Nobody's listening to what the American people want. And, if we were devoting proper resources, maybe we wouldn't have a Jordan Neely. All of the money that flows through New York City on a daily basis, you mean there's no place where we can put homeless people, where they can get rehabilitation, where they can get a meal, maybe a place to sleep, a place to shower? There's no such place like that. You go to New York City right now, and there's construction cranes everywhere. But what are they building? Luxury towers. They're not building them for homeless people, not building them for moderate income people. They're building them for the rich. Come on. So these are things that we need to force the government to prioritize. And, getting back to this situation on the train, as you said, it's not a black and white issue, right? I don't see it that way.
Nope, either.
It is a mental health issue. And it's also these folks who decided to restrain Jordan Neely took the initiative. If you put this former Marine in jail, who's taking the initiative the next time? And maybe it won't be just ranting and raving. Maybe it'll be actual violence. And pulling out your phone and filming it, oh, that's great. But you may be filming your own last few minutes, right? So if you're going to tell that we're going to punish you for taking the initiative, people won't do it. And, when that happens, we're in trouble. And if you're going to punish those who are willing to, protect, cops can't be everywhere, So it's a very delicate situation.
Yeah.
Because again, I just think any of us could be placed in that situation where we feel that we're threatened, right? We perceive a threat. And, you're just reacting to that threat. Attention isn't necessarily to hurt anybody, but it's self-protection of others. And somebody dies, right? This is just an unfortunate situation. And it was something that I wanted to, have people share their opinion on. I know it's a little late now to open up the phone lines, but, I wanted people to give their input, because I think a lot of people are looking at this. Like, there's been protests in the subways over his death, and it's understandable. But I think people are looking at it purely as a black and white issue. And I think that
it's not a black and white issue.
It's not. And I think that people need to understand that it is not. The issue is mental illness. And I think people also need to understand that, we can't help Jordan Neely anymore. Jordan Neely is gone. But we can be proactive in helping others who have mental illness before they get to that point where they're on the train ranting and raving and people perceive them as a threat. We didn't protest, before to shed a light on mental illness. We didn't talk about it. Now that somebody's dead, we want to go block the subway station, right? And I don't know. It might be too late after somebody's lost their life.
Yeah.
There's something that needs to be done.
Well,
proactively.
We have to hold our politicians accountable for some of this stuff, man, because the mayor of New York City talks a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say, I'm not a resident of New York anymore, but New York is near and dear to my heart. But I think that he's all talk and no action.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think he's all talk because let me tell you, de Blasio made it happen. When they were able to clear out the subways of the homeless and whatever they did with those people, I don't know what they did, but the trains were shut down during COVID for them to clean the stations and clean the trains and do all this stuff. There was no homeless people or mentally ill people on those trains.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Whatever system they used for that, it worked. Go out and seek out the homeless and mentally ill and give them the help that they need, man.
Well, see,
reconnect them with their families, because sometimes they don't take their medication, so they don't go give their family. But if you can get back with them and get them back on their medications, sometimes they can just go back home.
Well, you see, the problem is what we're doing is we're warehousing people, moving them from one location to another. So years ago, they had the hood, right? So they would put homeless shelters in those neighborhoods. But now as property value increased, now you got to move the people someplace else. So there was a huge homeless population that they housed on Randall's Island.
Yeah.
Right? They had some shelters there. Well, now property values on the increase, right? People now want to, move on to Randall's Island, right? You got to move those people again. So all you're doing is pushing them around the city. Well, yeah, where they want to close down Rikers Island, right? But Rikers Island is basically, it's a wasteland. It was built on over a landfill, right? So many correctional officers and inmates have gotten sick, cancers, from working on Rikers Island for a long period of time. So would that be a place to put homeless people? Absolutely. Out of sight, out of mind. And if they get sick, who's going to say anything? Who complains? Homeless people are basically visible, right? We see them, but we don't see them. So you put them on Rikers Island and they get sick. Who cares?
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah.
Look.
So, it is a tough situation. And, I just hope that from our discussion today, people will look at it, on a broader scale, a broader view, because it's more than just, this young man being choked. There was things that led up to it. There were things that happened while he was being choked. Other people were holding him down. So other people, I guess, perceived the threat too. So I think that we need to look at this on a broader scale and understand that everything is not just about black and white. Sometimes there are deeper issues. And I think that we need to understand that if you prosecute the former Marine, how does that bode for others who may want to protect themselves? Just something to think about. And, with that, I hope to see you again here today. Hopefully my partner in time will be back, Romane, and again, a shout out to her and her family. And I thank you all for listening, and please continue to support Gynesis Radio on all its platforms. Have a good day.